London, May 19, 1536. A pale, leaden sky hangs over the Tower of London. The air is thick with the kind of silence that comes before something irreversible. In the tower's inner courtyard, a scaffold has been hastily constructed, but not the usual English platform for noble executions. This one is lower, more intimate, designed not for an axe, but for a sword, and not by an Englishman, but a skilled executioner summoned from Calais. The whispers ripple through the waiting crowd. A queen will die today, the first in English history. Anne Boleyn, the woman for whom a king defied the Pope, will now pay for that defiance with her life. Inside the tower, in a small bare chamber where she has been held for the last 17 days, Anne wakes to her final morning. She is 35, still striking, still composed. The once magnetic queen now prepares to walk toward death with dignity. Her remaining ladies-in-waiting help her dress in silence. Anne chooses her final garments with care. A cloak of dark gray trimmed with fur. A deep crimson bodice beneath it, chosen perhaps because such fabric conceals what comes next. And then, that voice, still sharp, still laced with irony. "I hear the executioner is very good," she says softly. "I have a little neck." It's a moment preserved by witnesses, poised between courage and tragic humor. But how did it come to this? How did the woman once worshipped by the King of England become his condemned prisoner? To understand Anne Boleyn's final terror, we must go back to the beginning of her ambition, to the beginning of her rise. In January 1533, Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII married in secret. Anne was already pregnant, and Henry was already in defiance of the Pope. In September, their child was born, a daughter. The king had longed for a son. Instead, he was given a girl, one who would one day rule as Elizabeth I, but who, in that moment, was seen only as a bitter disappointment. Anne's reign as queen lasted just 3 years, but in that time, she reshaped England. Brilliant, sharp-tongued, and politically astute, Anne championed reform. She supported religious scholars, promoted the translation of the Bible into English, and stirred both admiration and fear. To her supporters, she was a symbol of progress. To her enemies, a dangerous heretic. But her true undoing was biological. After Elizabeth, Anne suffered a miscarriage in 1534, then another in 1535, this time a male fetus. For a king obsessed with a male heir, this was not just misfortune, it was failure. Henry's affection cooled, and in the vacuum left by fading love, enemies gathered. Chief among them, Thomas Cromwell, the king's calculating and ruthless minister. In April 1536, the plot solidified. Anne was accused of unthinkable crimes, adultery with 5 men, one of them her own brother, conspiracy against the king, treason. On May 2nd, she was arrested and taken to the Tower. Her trial, held on May 15th, was a performance. She had no legal counsel, no right to confront her accusers, and the jury. Nearly all political adversaries. Still, she spoke with grace and clarity. One witness said, "She answered with such wisdom and dignity that she seemed not a woman, but an angel." It didn't matter. The verdict had been sealed long before her defense. Guilty. The original sentence. Death by burning. The traditional fate for women convicted of treason. But Henry, perhaps moved by image more than mercy, changed the punishment to beheading, and ordered that an expert swordsman be brought from France, not an axe, a sword. It was, in theory, a quicker death. But as May 19th dawned, Anne received word. Her execution, scheduled for morning, had been delayed until noon. It was a final cruelty. A few more hours to wait for the end. She spent them in prayer, took communion, whispered again and again, "Lord, have mercy on me." And then a final oath. For my salvation, I am innocent of the charges for which I was condemned. At noon, the sound of drums began to echo through the tower. The time had come. Before leaving her chamber, Anne turned to the women who had remained loyal to her, her ladies-in-waiting. She gave each of them a parting token, a prayer book, a handkerchief, a piece of jewelry once worn in brighter days. And with a small, sad smile, she whispered, "Remember me, and how I end." They wept, but Anne did not. Outside, in the courtyard of the tower, the crowd had gathered, fewer than expected, around 1,000. But there was no jeering, no cheers, only a strange hush. As she emerged, walking across the courtyard in gray and crimson, the color of dignity and blood, men removed their hats. Even in death, Anne commanded a kind of reverence. She walked with poise, with pride, with something unshakable. Upon the scaffold she was granted permission to speak. Her final words were not filled with bitterness or accusation. Instead, she spoke with restraint, with purpose. "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die according to law. I speak not to accuse any man. I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you. For never was there a more gentle nor more merciful prince, and to me he was always a good and sovereign lord. No protest, no pleading, just calm submission and careful strategy." Anne was not just dying for herself. She was protecting her daughter, Elizabeth, by upholding the image of the crown, even as it crushed her. After her speech, she calmly removed her cloak and cap. She handed them to her attendants. Then, turning to the executioner, she gave him a small purse of gold. Payment for what would come next. There was no block. This would not be an English execution with an axe. This was a French execution, by sword. And that meant she would kneel upright without anything to rest her head on. One of her ladies stepped forward and gently tied a blindfold across Anne's eyes. Anne whispered quietly to herself, "Jesus, receive my soul. O Lord God, have pity on my soul." Behind her, the French swordsman moved into position. And then, a final deception meant to bring peace in her final moment. "Where is my sword?" he said aloud, but he already had it in hand. Anne turned her head, ever so slightly, toward the sound of the executioner's voice, and in that moment of distraction, the sword struck. A single stroke, swift, precise. The blade passed through her slender neck, and the Queen of England was no more. Silence gripped the courtyard. No cheers, just a sharp breath from the crowd. A gasp, followed by a low, uneasy murmur. The executioner lifted her head by the hair and proclaimed, "So perish the king's enemies." But the crowd did not roar in approval. They only watched, quiet and troubled, as cannon fire suddenly echoed through the tower and across the River Thames. It was a signal to Henry VIII waiting at Whitehall Palace. Anne was dead, and the king was now free to marry again. The next day, Henry became engaged to Jane Seymour. 10 days later, they were wed. As for Anne, there was no coffin. Her ladies, still weeping, helped gather her remains. The guards, unprepared, found only a crude arrow chest. They placed her body inside, and beside it, her severed head. She was taken to the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within the tower walls. There she was buried beneath the stone floor. No name, no marker, no tomb. A queen laid to rest like a criminal. Henry ordered her portraits destroyed, her symbols removed from palaces, her name struck from the royal record. It was a damnatio memoriae, a condemnation of memory. And it worked. To this day, no confirmed portrait of Anne Boleyn survives from her lifetime. But if Henry sought to erase her, he failed. Because 23 years later, the daughter he once dismissed, Elizabeth, took the throne, and she would reign for 45 years, a golden age, a daughter who would eclipse the father. In 1876, during a restoration of the chapel where Anne had been buried, workers found a set of bones, delicate, refined, a small skull. They were reburied with dignity. Today, a simple glass memorial marks the spot on the tower's lawn. Each year on May 19th, roses are laid in her honor. Because Anne Boleyn is no longer just a tragic queen. She is a symbol of injustice, of resilience, and of the terrifying price paid by women who dared to reach for power. The final irony: the daughter Henry dismissed became England's greatest monarch, and she ruled not in spite of Anne's fall, but because of it. A queen rose from the ashes of another. And the sacrifice that began on that gray May morning in 1536 was never truly silenced.